our Central New York team. It's certainly been different in more ways than one with COVID, and certainly a very different year from a standpoint of a crop year. So I'm going to talk about corn silage and how it looks like it's going to be, for some people, perhaps even a record early year, depending on when it was planted. Before I get started, I guess I want to acknowledge Dr. Larry Chase, professor in animal science at Cornell, recently retired. Him and I actually put this information originally together many, many years ago. I have updated, modified, changed a lot of different things in the presentation over the years, and especially for this evening. But there's probably a few slides and a little bit of information that's still there from our original presentation. So I just want to acknowledge the work that Larry did in providing some of this data and information from years ago. All right. So to me, what we ought to be thinking about is what should be our end goal from a standpoint of corn silage harvest. And this was one of the original slides. It's to harvest and to use harvest and storage practices that minimize the loss in feed tonnage and quality between the field and feeding the cow. And losses can vary widely from about 10% to greater than 30%. So there's a big range there. When you think about, you know, a lot of people kind of figure that corn silage is worth $50 a ton, and maybe you figure it's worth more or less than that. A 5 or 10% difference in losses adds up to lots of money in a big hurry. So the key points we're going to kind of cover, along with some others, are harvesting at the correct moisture and maturity. And one of the reasons for tonight is that maturity has been moving along quite rapidly this year, and I think it's going to catch a lot of people off guard. We're going to talk about processing corn silage, filling fast, packing, which is extremely important, sealing it with a good quality cover, considerations for using some type of an inoculant. We also at feed out want to be sure we keep a tight, straight face, minimize secondary fermentation, feed fast to minimize reheating, and of course we always want to be safe during harvest time when lots of equipment and lots of people are moving around. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is kind of what is going on out in the field right now, and what are some of the signs that we see, and what are they telling us? Well, the first thing is tasseling has generally occurred quite early in most locations. Silk on many cornfields are brown. That means the silk has died. It's done its job in pollinating each of those kernels. And those brown silks in some fields have been there for quite some time now. Some corn, believe it or not, as of yesterday, was starting to dent or dimple, those little indentations in the kernels that you start to see kind of just before, you know, that whole kernel fill really starts to take place. So here we are just barely past the middle of August, and we're seeing this already. So that tells me that things are really progressing. The other thing, and I guess the one thing as I go through some of this, is that I've learned over the years to never say anything is 100%. So I'm giving you this information based on my observations and some other folks that I've talked to kind of outside my region and stuff as far as what they're seeing. So, so the next thing is that most corn is showing little or no signs of some of the common leaf diseases that we commonly see. Like northern corn leaf blight and gray leaf spot. Sometimes these diseases come in, and they certainly still can, and they really start to basically brown the leaves up, and that really kind of starts the dry down process kind of prematurely. But we haven't seen much of that at all. And if that continues, I think we're going to see a lot of people that are fooled into thinking the corn is not ready. But when you think about the volume of what makes up corn silage, it's made up primarily of the stalk and the ear. And the leaves are very showy, but they don't make up a big volume. But a lot of people kind of use the leaves as kind of a signal of when to start. And we really could get fooled this year, and we could have stuff drying down. The ear could be drying down way early, and people think they still got plenty of time to go. The other thing is that I'm seeing in some cases, some of those lower leaves, the senescence has begun in some fields. And that's kind of a signal that basically the plant is starting to take its energy from those lower leaves and put it into reproduction into the kernels when those bottom leaves are starting to kind of dry up and turn brown. And I'm not talking about leaves that are turning yellow because of nitrogen deficiency, just kind of making that change because of maturity. There's a lot of information here, and many of you probably are seeing this. We've been sending out growing degree information this season, and I have to get my glasses on even to see it here. We list all these different locations and different planting dates and give you that information in an email once a week, and it kind of tells you how things are progressing. And on the Climate Smart Farming website, which I'm going to talk about that in a moment, it's really a pretty useful tool when you go to that. It can give you this information. You can put a location in, an address. You can look at rainfall. But for all of the different planting dates that are in this table and the locations, we are either near or in some cases over what the record is from a standpoint of growing degree days based on any given planting date. We started off a little bit cool, actually quite cool, when we were checking alfalfa heights and doing our forage quality monitoring. Our first week there were some locations we had snow that had fallen onto hayfields. So we started out behind the game, but we've certainly been catching up in a hurry. Now yesterday, today, and the next few days here, it's going to be a little cooler, so we're not going to be accumulating quite as much. But take a look at that information. So here's a little bit of information on climate smart farming. And if we get done early, what I may do is I may get on this website here and just kind of show you some of the things that you can do with it. But if you basically just do a Google search for Climate Smart Farming Kernel, it's going to be the first site that pops up. It's called climatesmartfarming.org. And below there, that website is for the part of the website that actually will help you to calculate growing degree days. And growing degree days really it's kind of looking at that heat accumulation for corn with a base of 50 and an upper limit of 82, and that's how you calculate it. So when should we be harvesting? So in the past, people have always looked at milk line on corn, and we have found out that that's really not the best indicator. There's too much variation in dry matter content at the same milk line. I can think of years before, when I was younger in high school, I remember getting forage tests at home on the farm. And back then, people used to say corn silage wasn't ready to harvest until you could hear the kernels rattling through the pipe of the chopper. Now, that was a different time. That was quite a few years ago, 40 or 45 years ago. Of course, the laboratories get the sample, they dry it, and they grind it. And when you analyze it in the lab doing that, it's going to show the greatest energy content with hard dent kernels that are black layered, and it's going to give you a calculated value for energy, and that's what we were basing things on. And we certainly didn't understand nutrition as well as we do today. And of course, that was before the time of kernel processors, well before the time of kernel processors. So what happened is we sent a lot of whole corn kernels out the back end of the cow, but we thought we were doing a good job. So now we know we need to look at dry matter content. So milk line can be used as an index of when to start monitoring whole plant dry matter. When the milk line is 1/4, that's the time to start monitoring dry matters, to kind of find that sweet spot. Whole plant dry matter is the best indicator of when to harvest. And I've had people argue with me and talk around like, well, should it be 35% dry matter? I like it a little wetter at 30 or 32, or I like it at 40 because we've accumulated a little bit more starch. And I remember a few years ago, actually before Ev Thomas retired from Minor Institute, him taking the time to take a look at that question again. And based on the balance of what you're getting out of the field and how well the cows are going to be able to utilize this feed, 35% was still kind of the sweet spot that we ought to be looking at. And from a practical standpoint, we're not going to always hit it. But if we can be within a couple of points above and below it, we're going to be in pretty darn good shape. Okay. So here's a picture of milk line. All right. So if you take an ear, you take the husks off, you break the ear off the plant, and then basically you break the ear in half. And this would be looking toward the tip end of the ear. So basically you're looking out towards the very tip where the silks would be coming out, okay? And the reason it's important to look at it from this end is that if you flip those kernels over or look at the other end, you're not gonna see a milk line. It's not gonna be visible at all. And it's gonna start from the cob and it's gonna work its way out toward the end where the kernel is dented. And on some varieties, it is more distinctive than others. And in some cases where you can hardly see it, if you just break some kernels off and you take a jackknife and you slice that kernel, you know, like I don't know, like you're slicing a tomato, you'll be able to see where the milk line is once you open it up. There'll be hard and firm material close to the cob, and then it'll be all watery up toward the end. So I guess I just wanted to make that point. A lot of times when we've gone a whole year without looking for milk line, sometimes we forget kind of how to really find it quickly. So basically that differentiation in color is what you're gonna see there, okay? So whole plant dry matter, how do we determine this? We need to chop a number of plants, whether it's running the chopper partway into the field, or it's using some type of a chipper or something. I guess I would say don't take plants that are along the roadside, or go in a way so it's kind of a representative part of the field. Use a Koster tester or a microwave. That's the best way to do it. A Koster tester, the reading is going to be 1 to 2 points higher than the actual dry matter. So if you get, say, 32 on the Koster, the dry matter is probably like 33 or 34. Green corn in a microwave or Koster tester, I find, doesn't dry as well as fermented corn. I don't know what the reason is, the moisture in the cells, it'll start to char the sample before it totally dries it. So there's portable NIR units as well. And I'll talk about those in a minute. They're very expensive. You're talking thousands of dollars. It's probably not something that a producer is going to have themselves, but an agribusiness person may have these units that may be able to help you a little bit. Although you need to be a little bit careful because they're not all the best out there. So when you get a number and say it's still too wet, what can you expect? Well, typical dry down rates are usually in the range of 0.5% to 1% per day. So 29% today may equal 30.5 to 32 in about 3 days. It can be variable. You need to kind of double check before you start chopping. We've certainly had years where it's been dry, and you think things are drying down and we get a good soaking rain and the plants will actually rehydrate. The moisture content will actually go up. So there's a lot of variables in play here, so you need to kind of be paying attention. Here's a picture of some of these handheld units, these NIR units. They're basically near infrared, and our laboratories use near infrared technology for quick turnaround. They certainly do a much better job in the lab in calibrating and keeping those things working right. If you look at the range down there, there's one of them that's a little further to the left that's probably the most variable or less accurate. There's 4 other ones there. The one that you're probably most going to run into, if you run into any at all, is the NIR4 farm that Dairy One is working with. That's probably one of the better ones, although I guess I would say that there's certainly some variation there and some calibration That's pretty important. And if you could confirm things with a Koster tester, that's probably the best way to do it. But this technology is on some self-propelled choppers today. It's getting better all the time. And to me, it's amazing the way the technology is advancing. So anyway, kind of keep your eyes and ears open. So we want to be kind of around that 35%, and 32 to 38 is a good range to be in. You may need to skip around some fields that may or may not be practical, kind of dependent on your situation. But certainly worth considering if you've got a field or two that are way off the mark from a standpoint of still being really, really wet. So if we harvest too wet, less than 30% dry matter, we're going to get less dry matter yield per acre, okay? We're going to have more runoff from the silo, even our bunk silo. We're going to have more acidic fermentation. Probably the cows are going to eat a little bit less. Dry matter intake could be diminished a little bit. And if intake is diminished, that's going to mean lower milk production. We can't guarantee that that'll happen, but the risk is certainly there. There's less efficient fermentation and conversion of carbohydrates to heat and carbon dioxide. So we're wasting some things when it's that dry. When it's greater than 40%, we likely have not added any more yield. We're going to have decreased starch digestion, even though we have these kernel processors that can bust up these kernels. It certainly does widen the harvest window for these self-propelled choppers and custom operators that are going to farm. We hit these kind of levels, the starch in those kernels becomes crystallized. And even when they're kernel processed well, in all likelihood, we're going to lose some feed value from a standpoint of some of that starch passing through these cows, especially if we haven't had a long fermentation period of time. Ideally, we'd like to not feed new crop corn until around Christmas or New Year's, because there's still some activity that goes on. The digestion of starch improves over that period of time. I realize that everybody doesn't have that luxury. And actually, in some areas where we've had a short hay crop this year, people that have planned for that extra inventory is almost like money in the bank. It's going to give them insurance from a standpoint of having enough forage. They may have to shift to a heavier corn silage diet. The other thing that happens when it's really dry is our fiber digestion actually goes down. Think about corn as basically two different crops. It's basically the corn grain and it's a grass, and corn is technically a grass. So the fiber portion, as it ages, the digestibility goes down. So we kind of get hurt in two different ways. We certainly have a greater risk for some molds and mycotoxins. It's more difficult to pack, probably going to be less palatable. Feed value is going to be poor from an actual standpoint, so we're going to suffer from a standpoint of production. So we want to be somewhere in the middle there. Chop length. And I guess I would say these are general guidelines. You need to work with your nutritionist because a lot of times it depends on what else you're feeding and what that feed is like. But here's some general guidelines with a processor. 3/4 of an inch theoretical length of cut. If it does get away from you and it gets up to 40% dry matter, reducing that theoretical length of cut to say 1/2 inch. Roll settings 1 to 3 millimeters. And this should give you the 3/4 inch with the 1 to 3 millimeter setting. Numbers on the Penn State forage particle separator that are shown there. Okay, a little bit on top, a lot in that second box, and a little bit more in the third box, and very little on the bottom. So how about BMR corn silage? It's going to be at the same stage of maturity, a little bit wetter, not too much. We may want to leave it a little bit longer. Chop length 3/4 of an inch, and a little bit more on that top screen, most likely. And what we've seen in recent years here, I guess I shouldn't say it's so recent, but is shredlage. These are units that basically have a greater differential in the speed of the rolls, and rolls that are a little bit different designed, longer chop length, 1 to 1.25 inches, Dry matter, kind of where we've been shooting all along. But basically, we're looking to kind of tear those pieces of stalk to try to improve the surface area, to improve fiber digestibility. It's going to give us some greater physical fiber by chopping it that long. So roll settings similar to, you got to be looking at these things and having your nutritionist or somebody kind of check particle size. And there's been studies that have shown a little bit more milk production and improved feed efficiency. In some cases, maybe we haven't seen anything, but some pretty amazing technology out there. So how about just kernel process in general? There's still some people that aren't processing corn, but I guess I would say anytime you're going to upgrade a chopper, trade it in, this is a must. There's tremendous value in processing corn to get the value out of those kernels. It's going to improve starch and fiber digestibility. If you look at a lot of different studies, the average milk production response has been basically 1.1 pounds. There was one that showed a negative response. I'm not sure why, but sometimes upwards of 3.7 pounds of milk per cow per day. That's pretty hard to leave on the table. The benefit of processing is going to be greater when corn is more mature and drier. But I guess I would say we do not want to purposely wait for that corn to get drier because we have a processor. Again, it kind of opens up that harvest window. And obviously, when those kernels are really hard and dry, a processor is going to give us a great benefit compared to not processing. So here's some information on how they calculate processing score in the laboratories. Basically, they're measuring the percent starch in the corn silage that passes through a 4.75 millimeter screen. They take about 500 milliliters of dried corn silage and shake it for 10 minutes through a Rotap sieve shaker. And the material not passing through that screen is collected and they analyze it for starch. We like to see the processing score be 60%. I like it even maybe a little more than that, 65, 70. When it's poorly processed, we're going to lose some of that feed value. And the one thing I guess I would say is that green corn, if you send it into the lab, and I'll show you some other methods, there's actually an app you can use, but your processing score at feed out is going to be greater than it is with green corn, probably in the neighborhood of 5 to 10% higher, okay? Here's some information from Cumberland Valley Analytical Services. Now, it's getting quite aged, 2012 and 2013. And basically, there was only 36% of the samples that were sent in for a processing score that were optimally processed. And 13% were inadequate and 51% were adequate. There's no doubt about it. And I don't want to get down on custom operators, but they got a lot of acres to cover. It takes power to operate these processors well. And when they're opened up, when the millimeters are opened up on the rolls, it takes less power and a lot of times you can go faster that way. So actually I'll show you in a moment here. So make sure that they know you're checking this stuff so that you get the job done, and either you or your nutritionist ought to be doing some checking from time to time to be sure that it's processed adequately. The time to find out that it was not processed well is not when you start feeding it. The game's over. It's too late at that point, okay? Here's some stuff from Char Hansen. It's looking at kernel processing score and fecal starch. Again, this is kind of from that same period of time. And basically, the fecal starch is shown in the red bars from right to left. And the kernel processing score is basically the top of the green bars. And it's pretty obvious, as the kernel processing score goes up, the amount of fecal starch, or in other words, starch that passes through the cow and ends up in the manure, goes down. So we want to be on the left side of this chart here. If we're on the right, we spend all this money growing this crop, we're sending it right out the back end. Not a good economic situation, that's for sure. So how do we field test for kernel processing? So it started out, I guess I would say the Pioneer method is now also the Char-Hansen method. Pioneer came out with these little cups, and Char-Hansen has them as well. Basically, they're 32-ounce cups, and the largest McDonald's soda cup is 32 ounces as well. So if you don't have access from one of these, from one of your representatives, next time you go to McDonald's, get the big soda. So you fill it up with incoming silage, spread it out on a flat surface. Be careful that you're not on the apron where trucks are coming in, where you're going to get run over. Practice safety. Spread the kernels out, and what you're looking for is kernels that are 1/2 of a whole kernel or greater. If there's more than 2 of these, something needs to change on that chopper. The rolls need to be tightened down. Hopefully the rolls are not worn out and need to be replaced, but they do wear out. You can also use the Penn State box and kind of sort out the kernels and kind of see what you've got from a standpoint of whole or cracked kernels. So we don't want to see whole kernels, and in fact, we want to see most of the kernels that are 1/2 of a kernel or less in size, okay? There's an app out there to do this, and lest you believe that this is going to be so easy, you're going to download it onto your phone, and you're just going to point your phone at some corn silage, and it's going to give you a number. It's not that easy. But anyway, it's a smartphone application that uses image analysis algorithm developed at the University of Wisconsin in Madison to determine this. Brian Luck, PhD out there, worked on this. It's pretty neat. I haven't tried it out myself, but I hope to by the time the season's over here. It's called Silage Snap. It's free, and it's available through Google Play and Apple iTunes. If you go to the University of Wisconsin-Madison website, it gives you all kinds of good, helpful information. There's an instructional video, and there are certainly some steps involved in kind of washing out the kernels and spreading them out. And anyway, so anyway, if you're into using your smartphone for some of this kind of stuff, I guess I would see maybe some agribusiness professionals using this with their customers. Certainly the quickest and easiest way is to kind of just use that cup and a visual. Both of them will kind of get you to the same spot, but pretty neat technology. So how about packing density? We want to get this stuff packed in these bunk silos. This is some work that was done by Kurt Ruppel back in '92, so quite a few years ago. And I believe this was related to haylage. But the same things apply to corn silage. When I'm taking a look at inventories or helping people to kind of figure out roughly where they're at or how much storage space they need, I usually start out with using 15 pounds of dry matter per cubic foot. So if your corn silage was 33.3% dry matter, that would be 45 pounds wet weight corn silage per cubic foot. Okay, so on the left, 10 pounds is, boy, not packed at all. And on the right, 22 is packed like a rock. We want to achieve those high levels of density for lots of reasons. We can fit more in the same space. Our losses are going to be a lot less. And secondary fermentation is going to be likely a lot less as well. Dry matter losses are going to be a lot lower the better we can pack that stuff down. Here's some guidelines that actually Kurt had come up with. We basically need to think about what our packing vehicle weight is, so our pusher tractor and then maybe another tractor, and in some cases we need even more than that. But it came up with a guideline of needing 800 pounds. Let's see here. The formula is basically if you took your tractor weight in pounds and divided by 800, it gives you the tons per hour of which you should be bringing silage in to the bunk silo. So that would be the maximum. So think about it. When you got a self-propelled chopper that's harvesting maybe 70 to 100 acres a day of 20-ton corn silage, what do you need for tractor weight to keep up with that? You can hardly push the stuff out of the way quick enough before the next one comes in. And that's been one of the problems with all of this feed coming in at a really rapid rate, is that we're not getting a good pack on these silos, okay? Here's a chart here that gives you tons per hour and tractor weight. 150 tons per hour, 120,000 pounds. That's 60 tons of tractor weights. Think about that. That's a lot of weight. That's a lot of weight. Okay? We want to pack and put this stuff in with a progressive wedge, flatten the wedge with decreased fill time, pack it constantly. Multiple tractors was what we'd like to do, shallow layers, and try not to disrupt silage that's been packed already. Here's a shot here. They're actually filling 2 silos side by side. And in some cases, to achieve those levels that I just showed you, this is what we really need to do. We really need to fill more than one at a time. There's certainly some other equipment that people have used. This equipment that's been used in landfills, claw's foot, I think they call them, or whatever. They're shaking units, and they're just massively heavy units to pack this stuff down. Covered with plastic, and before we get into that, this shows making kind of a bag out of a bunk silo. And I guess I would say I've seen more people do this, lining the walls. And this is especially valuable if you have basically these portable walls where there's cracks in between and openings and stuff to try to seal that silage. It's unbelievable the difference that it makes. And yeah, it's not easy, and you're going to get some tears in it. Yeah, probably are. But you flop it over and then put another layer on top and try to get that snow melt and rain to stay away from the silage and keep the air out of the silage. Cover it immediately when you're finished. Cover when rain is going to shut you down for a period of time. I know that's a hassle, but it certainly makes a difference. Tire to tire, and those are a hassle. Covering options. Most people use black plastic. More people are using products like Silo Stop, Feed Fresh, other oxygen limiting covers. And it seems that every year there's a different product or different technology out there. These oxygen limiting covers are expensive, but I'll tell you, it makes a world of difference. When you peel back the plastic and there is really no visible spoilage to throw away, and you ought to be throwing that spoilage away, not feeding it. The cows really don't like it, and they know the difference. But this stuff does make a difference. There's no doubt about it. Here's looking at dry matter losses in bunk silos with covered versus no covers. And I don't see bunk silos not covered anymore, or very infrequently. And I guess I would say there's a reason for that. And people that were not covering, probably their management level wasn't up to par on a lot of things. And most of those people aren't milking cows anymore. They're not in business. So I'm not saying you're never going to see it, but look at the difference. Less than 4% dry matter loss to basically about 13%. There is no way economically that you can afford to take that loss and say, it's not worth it for me to cover the silo. Here's some taking a look and looking at dry matter digestibility with a cover versus no cover, looking at the depth from the top at 12.5 centimeters and 25 centimeters. Basically, what this is showing you is that when you have no cover, basically you're going to have dry matter losses and digestibility losses that are going to just seep down into that silo, deep into the silage. So it's not just the stuff that you throw away, but you've compromised the quality of that silage quite a ways down in from the surface. How about, so when you take a look at these covers, here's some stuff that's like 12 years old from the Cornell Nutrition Conference. Dr. Richard Muck has looked at these. He used a 2-step Silo Stop product, 4 corn silage and 2 alfalfa silage bunkers. Bunker walls were covered in the Silo Stop system. He used an 8 mil plastic as a comparison, and losses in the top 6 inches, this is 2 feet from the wall, were 19% for the plastic, 1% for the Silo Stop. This was with alfalfa, but holy crow. Smaller differences in the middle. Losses between 6 and 24 inches are similar, and you'd expect about a 5% higher loss with the 6 mil plastic. Now here's a silo that's covered sidewalls, tire to tire. This is what we're looking for. Here's a different system using these bags. The important thing is that the plastic needs to stay tight against the silage surface. If there's air pockets or any kind of bubbles in that plastic, you're going to have problems. You're going to have lots and lots of spoilage. And it seems like a lot of these newer products, SiloStop and others, the product almost kind of clings to the silage. It really makes a difference from a standpoint of keeping the air out. How about inoculants? Dr. Keith Bolson from Kansas State has done a tremendous amount of work looking at inoculants. He's done over 200 laboratory scale trials with 1,000 silages, 25,000 silos. He got positive results from a standpoint of dry matter recovery in greater than 90% of his trials. That's pretty hard to beat. So what happens during normal fermentation? So oxygen gets used up, okay? If you look at this graph here on the bottom, you can see oxygen goes down in a hurry. pH goes down, it kind of lags. Bacterial levels rise and then they drop as the pH drops, and silage reaches what we call a stable phase at about 14 days or so. That being said, we know that there's still activity that's going on for a long period of time. That's why you hear people say, if you can, it's nice to not have to feed new crop corn until Christmas or New Year's. There's a lot of activity that's going on. The one thing I would say is if you're using a inoculant that is not necessarily a lactic acid promoting bacteria, but a Lactobacillus Buchneri product, that works a little bit differently. It's going to take longer for that pH to drop, and it's going to take longer for it to reach a stable phase. And I'll talk about those in just a moment. So things to think about with inoculants. They're not a miracle product, okay? And it doesn't make up for bad management or bad handling of the inoculant. Make sure you're using a well-proven research-based inoculant. Be sure you got enough inventory on hand. Calibrate the applicator. Store it and mix it according to the label. It doesn't mean you use boiling hot water because it mixes better, because you're probably going to kill most of the bugs. Store it according to label directions. Make sure you store it if it's supposed to be stored in a refrigerator or a freezer. If it's kept on the dashboard of the pickup truck and we've had some 90-degree days and it's supposed to be stored in a refrigerator, you probably can just throw it in the gutter because it's not going to probably do anything. Keep it mixed in cool solutions. Be sure that you haven't killed the bugs because you've overheated them. Don't mix more than you need. They've got a shelf life. There's been some cases in the past. Chopper breaks down. You've got the applicator. It's all mixed up. It sits there for days. It's in the hot sun. It's probably shot. There's also been cases where these applicators where the inoculant was stored, guess where it was? It was pretty close to the engine and the exhaust of the chopper. It got pretty hot. So just some cautions to kind of think about. There's nothing worse than putting dead bugs on. It's not going to do anything. Here's what we're kind of looking for, some fermentation end products in corn silage and high moisture corn. As far as pH, with corn silage, 3.7 to 4.2, lactic acid, 4 to 7%, acetic acid, 1 to 3, and you can read the rest of them there. The one word of caution is if you're using an inoculant that contains Lactobacillus Buchneri, you're going to get a higher acetic acid and lower lactic acid level than indicated below. The Lactobacillus Buchneri products, basically, people ought to be using them if they're having problems with secondary fermentation at feed out. They're not taking enough feed off to keep it fresh, or they're getting reheating in the feed bunk when they feed. Those products basically kind of minimize that secondary fermentation by the high levels of acetic acid. So if you send it in for a fermentation analysis, you're going to get results that are different because of the product that you're using. And I guess I would say if those issues are not a problem for you, there's no reason to be wasting your money on that type of a product. They're great products, but they're really meant kind of for that specific kind of purpose. Now, there are products out there that have enzymes in them to kind of get them jump-started. There's some products that actually have lactic acid promoting bacteria and Lactobacillus Buchner in combination. So there's a lot of different tools out there in your toolbox, but make sure you're using what's appropriate for you. And like I said, I guess I hate to see people wasting money on a product. Again, not that there's anything wrong with this type of product, because there isn't, but use it where it's appropriate and where it's needed, because it does cost you some money. So the key points again, I guess to kind of get back to where we started here. Harvest at the correct moisture content, process it well, monitor what's going on with the processing. Sometimes if you just have one of these cups out there and your custom operator sees the cup, they'll do a little better job of processing because they know that you're checking, or they think you're checking. Monitor fill it fast, pack well, seal it with a good cover, use a proven inoculant. Be sure you've done a good job of keeping it viable. Feed out with a tight, straight face, use a defacer, and feed fast to minimize reheating. And with that, I'll leave it there. And do we have any questions? No? Holy crow. All right.
So does anyone have any questions for Dave?
I guess the main point, or the main reason of doing this evening, was that we're going to have corn ready early. Likely some corn will be ready the last week of August, first week of September, depending on the planting date and the variety. And I think many people are going to be caught with their pants down. They're going to look at the corn, they're going to say it's green, especially if some of these leaf diseases don't come in, and they're going to wait and they're going to wait, and by the time they start, they're going to be too dry. And they're going to pay for it the whole next year while they're feeding this corn that didn't ferment well with rock hard kernels that cows are passing starch right through them. Anyway, no questions?
No questions.
All right, well, with that, I guess I would say thank you for attending. I appreciate it. And
So John Winchell said that he has checked around 20 samples this week from Connecticut, Mass, Vermont, New York, and Maine, and he was getting anywhere between 22 to 37%.
so I'm going to try to repeat that because I'm not sure if people could hear you. John Winchell has checked from parts of New England into New York. How many? 22 samples? Or
20 samples.
20 samples, and got from 22. Obviously, that's pretty wet, long ways to go. But some samples that were as high as 37 already. Yes. So anyway, we're already on the cusp of this stuff catching up to us here. And to me, well, agribusiness people, you should be out there warning your customers and trying to do some dry matters with them to kind of see where we're at. Custom guys ought to be calling up their folks and getting things scheduled and getting going, because we're going to get caught with our pants down.
John also said that he saw droughted samples were more of the 37% dry matter.
Okay, droughted samples. Yeah, it's not surprising. And actually in our region here, okay, and John said that the droughted samples, corn silage that was drought stressed was the stuff that was on the drier side. But there's no doubt. You look at the growing degree information and you take a look at the crop that's out there. Our region covers 8 counties: Fulton, Montgomery, Herkimer, Otsego, Shenango, Schoharie, Saratoga, and Madison. I think I've got them all. And we certainly had a lot of dry weather, and we're certainly still behind for the year. Some areas didn't get some of the recent rains in the last 2 to 3 weeks. Where I live, which is in Saratoga County, we actually got a good dose of rain, probably a little too much too fast that ran off, but a lot of it soaked in, and it's amazing how good a lot of the corn looks. And hopefully that will help us to make up for maybe some of the shortfall with hay crop, especially second cutting that people had this year. So beware, lean on your agribusiness people to help you with some of this. Call them up, use your own coster tester, and don't get caught starting out at 38% or 40, because you're going to pay for it the whole rest of the year in lost milk production. And that's what you're going to be dealing with. So, okay. If nothing.
All right,
So if anyone has anything else to say, thank you, everyone. And we will get this recording out.
Okay, thank you very much for attending, and
Bye, everyone.
we'll be in communication some more. Thank you.
Take care.